He held his ground, and the 6 SEALs couldn't ignore who he really was. Marcus Thompson never imagined that a quiet Tuesday evening at Murphy's bar would change everything. The 32-year-old construction worker sat alone at the corner table, nursing his second beer and watching the news on the old television mounted above the bar. His calloused hands wrapped around the cold bottle as he tried to forget another long day of back-breaking work on the downtown building project. The bar was mostly empty, except for a few regulars and the bartender, Jimmy, who had been running the place for over 20 years. Murphy's wasn't the kind of establishment that attracted trouble, but it wasn't fancy either. It was the sort of place where working men came to unwind, share stories, and escape the pressures of daily life. Marcus had been coming here for 3 years, ever since his divorce was finalized. The familiar surroundings provided comfort during the loneliest times. He knew every scratch on the wooden tables, every faded photograph on the walls, and every story Jimmy had told at least a dozen times. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The door opened with its usual creak, and 6 men walked in. They were clearly military, evident from their posture, haircuts, and the way they moved with purpose and confidence. Marcus didn't pay them much attention at first, focusing instead on the news report about local construction projects. Ironically, his own work site was featured in the segment. The 6 men settled at the large table near the center of the bar, their voices carrying across the small space. They ordered rounds of beer and shots, laughing loudly at jokes Marcus couldn't hear clearly. Their conversation grew more animated as the evening progressed, and their voices became increasingly boisterous. Marcus learned from their conversation that they were Navy SEALs, recently returned from deployment. They spoke about their training, their missions, and their brotherhood with the pride that came from being part of an elite unit. He respected their service, but their growing rowdiness was beginning to disturb the peaceful atmosphere he had come to cherish at Murphy's. The situation escalated when one of the SEALs, a stocky man with a thick neck and aggressive demeanor named Rodriguez, began making crude comments about the female news anchor on television. His friends laughed, encouraging him to continue. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as the comments became increasingly inappropriate and disrespectful. Jimmy, the bartender, looked uncomfortable but seemed reluctant to confront a table full of Navy SEALs. The other patrons either ignored the situation or appeared too intimidated to speak up. Marcus found himself in a moral dilemma. He could continue minding his own business, or he could do what his conscience was telling him was right. When Rodriguez made a particularly vulgar comment that included graphic descriptions of what he would do to the news anchor, Marcus had heard enough. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the worn wooden floor. The sound caught the attention of the SEALs, who turned to look at him with mixture of curiosity and challenge in their eyes. "Excuse me," Marcus said in a calm but firm voice, "but there are decent people in here. Maybe you could keep your comments to yourself." The bar fell silent. Even the old jukebox seemed to lower its volume. Rodriguez stared at Marcus for a long moment, sizing him up. The other SEALs exchanged glances, clearly amused by what they perceived as an ordinary civilian challenging them. "Did you just tell me to shut up?" Rodriguez asked, standing up to face Marcus. He was shorter than Marcus, but built like a tank, with muscles that spoke of years of intensive military training. "I asked you politely to show some respect," Marcus replied, maintaining his calm demeanor despite the tension building in his chest. "There's no need for that kind of talk," Rodriguez laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bar. "Listen here, construction boy. We just spent 8 months keeping your sorry behind safe while you played with your little hammers and nails. I think we've earned the right to say whatever we want." The other SEALs stood up now, forming a semicircle around Marcus. Their body language was intimidating, designed to make him back down and retreat to his corner table. Marcus could feel every eye in the bar watching him, waiting to see what he would do. "Your service is appreciated," Marcus said, his voice steady. But that doesn't give you the right to disrespect women or disturb everyone else's evening. The largest of the SEALs, a man with sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm, stepped forward. You have no idea who you're messing with, buddy. We're trained killers. We could end you before you even knew what happened. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he didn't move from his position. Something inside him refused to back down, even though logic told him he was outnumbered and outmatched. He thought about his ex-wife, his sister, and his mother. He thought about all the women in his life who deserved better than to be talked about the way these men were speaking. Maybe you could, Marcus said quietly, but that still wouldn't make it right. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The other patrons sat frozen, afraid to move or speak. Jimmy gripped a beer bottle behind the bar, clearly debating whether to call the police or try to intervene himself. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles and took a step closer to Marcus. You know what? I think you need to learn some respect for your betters. Maybe we should take this outside and teach you a lesson about knowing your place. Marcus had been in fights before, mostly during his younger days, but nothing like this. These men were professionally trained fighters, and there were 6 of them. Any reasonable person would apologize, buy them around, and hope they forgot about the whole thing. But something deeper than reason was driving Marcus now. I'm not looking for trouble, Marcus said. I just want to finish my beer in peace. If you want to continue your conversation, maybe you could do it without the graphic details. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The oldest of the SEALs, a man who looked to be in his late 30s with graying hair at his temples, studied Marcus with intense eyes. Unlike the others, he hadn't said anything yet, but Marcus could feel him analyzing the situation, reading body language and assessing threats the way only experienced soldiers could. "What's your name?" the older SEAL asked suddenly. "Marcus Thompson," he replied, meeting the man's gaze directly. "Well, Marcus Thompson, you've got brass. I'll give you that. Most people would have apologized and bought us around by now." "I'm not most people," Marcus said simply. The older SEAL smiled slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "No, I can see that. Tell me, Marcus, what makes you think you can stand up to 6 Navy SEALs? What makes you so special?" Marcus considered the question carefully. He could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, the pressure to either prove himself or admit defeat. The honest answer was that he didn't think he was special at all. He was just a man who had reached a line he wasn't willing to cross. "Nothing makes me special," Marcus said, "but sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when you're scared." The admission of fear seemed to surprise the SEALs. They had expected him to posture, to claim he wasn't afraid, to try to match their bravado. Instead, Marcus had given them honesty, and they didn't quite know how to respond to it. Rodriguez, however, wasn't interested in philosophical discussions. "Scared is right," he sneered. "You should be terrified. Do you have any idea what we could do to you?" "Probably," Marcus said, "but being afraid doesn't mean you have to run away." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could see the wheels turning in each man's head, trying to figure out what kind of person they were dealing with. Was he crazy? Was he hiding something? Did he have backup coming? Or was he simply what he appeared to be, an ordinary man who had decided to make a stand? The older SEAL, who Marcus would later learn was called Chief Pedersen, continued to study him with those penetrating eyes. "You know, Marcus, there's something about you that doesn't add up. Most civilians, when faced with 6 SEALs, would either run or try to prove how tough they are. You're doing neither. That's interesting." Marcus shrugged. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Pedersen repeated slowly. "And what exactly do you think the right thing is here?" "Treating people with respect," Marcus said. "All people." whether they're news anchors on TV or guys just trying to have a quiet drink. Rodriguez stepped forward again, his face red with anger. "You sanctimonious piece of—" "Rodriguez," Pedersen said sharply, cutting him off. "Stand down." The younger SEAL looked surprised, but obeyed immediately. The chain of command was clearly established among these men, and Pedersen was at the top. "Marcus," Pedersen said, "I'm going to ask you one more time. What makes you think you can lecture us about respect?" Marcus took a deep breath. He could feel that this moment was crucial, that his answer would determine how the rest of the evening played out. He thought about lying, about making up some story that would make him seem more impressive or intimidating. But lies had never been his way. "Because," Marcus said quietly, "respect isn't something you earn through violence or intimidation. It's something you give because it's right. And right now, you're not giving it to anyone, not to the women you're talking about, not to the other people in this bar, and not to yourselves." The words seemed to hit harder than any physical blow could have. The SEALs exchanged glances, and for the first time since they had entered the bar, they looked uncertain. Marcus had challenged not just their behavior, but their character. And he had done it without raising his voice or making threats. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator behind the bar and the distant sound of traffic outside. Marcus remained standing, his hands relaxed at his sides, waiting to see how they would respond to his unexpected challenge to their honor rather than their strength. He held his ground, and the 6 SEALs couldn't ignore who he really was. Chief Pedersen's eyes narrowed as he continued studying Marcus. The other SEALs waited for their leader's signal, ready to follow whatever course he chose. The bar remained frozen in time, with Jimmy clutching the phone behind the counter, finger hovering over the emergency numbers. "You know what, Marcus?" Pedersen said finally. "You've got guts. Stupid guts, maybe, but guts nonetheless." He turned to his men. "Everybody sit down. Now." Rodriguez looked like he wanted to protest, but the authority in Pedersen's voice was unmistakable. One by one, the SEALs returned to their table, though their eyes remained fixed on Marcus. The construction worker slowly returned to his corner table, but the tension in the room remained thick. "Jimmy," Pedersen called to the bartender, "bring us another round. And whatever Marcus here is drinking, put it on our tab." Jimmy nodded quickly, grateful that violence had been avoided, at least for now. He hurried to fulfill the order, his hands shaking slightly as he poured the drinks. Marcus waved off the offered beer, indicating he was fine with what he had. For the next hour, an uneasy peace settled over Murphy's bar. The SEALs continued their conversation, but their voices were noticeably quieter. Marcus could feel them watching him, studying him, trying to figure out what made him tick. He pretended to focus on the television, but his attention was actually divided between the news and the ongoing assessment happening at the nearby table. Around 10 o'clock, 4 of the SEALs decided to call it a night. They said their goodbyes and headed out into the evening, leaving only Pedersen and a younger SEAL named Mitchell at the table. The departure of the others seemed to ease the tension considerably, and Jimmy visibly relaxed behind the bar. Pedersen stood up and walked over to Marcus's table. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. "It's a free country." "That it is," Pedersen agreed, settling into the chair. "Thanks to people like us." "Thanks to people like you," Marcus corrected. "I never served." "Why not?" Pedersen asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "When I was 18, my father had a heart attack. Someone needed to take care of the family business and support my mother. Military service was a luxury I couldn't afford." Pedersen nodded slowly. "Family first. I can respect that." He took a sip of his beer. "What kind of business?" "Construction. My father built houses, small commercial buildings, nothing fancy but good, honest work." Marcus paused. He taught me that how you do something matters as much as what you do. Sounds like a wise man. He was. He also taught me to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Pedersen smiled slightly. Ah, now we're getting to it. That's why you spoke up tonight, isn't it? Not because you thought you could take us in a fight, but because you thought it was the right thing to do. Marcus nodded. Something like that. You know, Marcus, I've been a SEAL for 15 years. I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and places I can't even tell you about. In all that time, I've learned to read people pretty quickly. It's a survival skill. And what do you read about me? Marcus asked. That's the interesting part. Most civilians are easy to read. They're either afraid of us, want to impress us, or want something from us. But you're different. You looked at 6 trained killers and saw 6 men who were acting like jerks. That takes either incredible stupidity or incredible character. Marcus laughed softly. Probably a little of both. Pedersen studied him for another moment. Tell me about your father. What else did he teach you? Why do you want to know? Humor me. Marcus thought about the question. He taught me that a man's word is his bond. That you judge people by their actions, not their words. That there's dignity in honest work, no matter what kind of work it is. And that sometimes the hardest thing to do is the right thing to do. Sounds like military values to me, Pedersen observed. Maybe. He was too young for Korea and too old for Vietnam, but he had friends who served. He respected what they did, but he also believed that service came in many forms. Such as raising a family, building homes for people, creating something that lasts, standing up for what's right when it would be easier to stay quiet. Pedersen nodded thoughtfully. You know, Marcus, my men and I have been through hell together. We've saved each other's lives more times than I can count. When you've been through that kind of experience, it creates a bond that's hard to explain to outsiders. I imagine so. But sometimes, that bond can make you feel like you're above the rules that apply to everyone else. Like you've earned the right to act however you want because you've sacrificed so much for your country. Marcus remained silent, sensing that Pedersen was working through something important. Tonight, when you stood up to us, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Respect isn't something you earn through what you've done. It's something you give because of who you are. Your friend Rodriguez didn't seem to see it that way. Pedersen sighed. Rodriguez is a good soldier, but he's angry. He lost his best friend on our last deployment. Sometimes anger makes you forget who you're supposed to be. I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus said sincerely. Thank you, but that's not an excuse for how we behaved tonight. My father would have been ashamed of me. Was he military too? Marine, Vietnam, 2 tours. He used to tell me that being a warrior wasn't about being the toughest guy in the room. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus nodded. Sounds like a wise man. He was. He also would have kicked my rear end for letting my men talk about women the way they were talking tonight. The 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts about their fathers and the lessons they had learned. Mitchell, the young SEAL, remained at the other table, occasionally glancing over but giving his chief privacy to have his conversation. Can I ask you something, Marcus? Pedersen said finally. Sure. When you stood up tonight, were you afraid? Terrified, Marcus admitted without hesitation. But you did it anyway. My father used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Smart man. Pedersen finished his beer and signaled Jimmy for another. You know, in SEAL training, they put you through situations designed to break you. Sleep deprivation, hypothermia, physical exhaustion that pushes you beyond what you think is humanly possible. The instructors are looking for people who won't quit, no matter how bad it gets. Sounds brutal. It is. But the funny thing is, some of the toughest guys physically are the first ones to ring the bell and quit. And some guys who don't look like much keep going when everyone expects them to fail. Marcus sensed there was a point coming. What they're really testing isn't physical strength. It's character. They want to know, when everything is on the line, when it would be easier to give up, will you do what needs to be done? And you think that's what happened tonight? I think tonight, a construction worker showed more character than 6 Navy SEALs. And that's something I need to think about. Jimmy approached the table cautiously. Last call, gentlemen. I'll be closing up in 15 minutes. Pedersen nodded. Thanks, Jimmy. And thanks for not calling the cops earlier. That could have gotten messy. No problem, Jimmy replied, though his relief was evident. Just glad everything worked out peaceful-like. As Jimmy walked away, Pedersen turned back to Marcus. I owe you an apology, and so do my men. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. We came in here acting like we owned the place. We disrespected the women on that TV, we disrespected you and the other customers, and we disrespected ourselves. That's not who we're supposed to be. Marcus appreciated the apology, but he could see the struggle in Pedersen's eyes. Sometimes good people do things they're not proud of. Doesn't mean they're not still good people. You're very forgiving for someone who got threatened by 6 guys twice your size. My ex-wife used to say I was too forgiving for my own good, Marcus said with a wry smile. Ex-wife, huh? What happened? If you don't mind me asking? Marcus considered whether to answer such a personal question from someone he had just met. But there was something about Pedersen that invited honesty. She said I cared more about doing the right thing than about making the smart choice. Tonight was probably a perfect example of what she was talking about. She left you because you had principles? She left me because my principles made life harder than it needed to be. When my company was cutting corners on a job, I reported it to the city inspector. Cost us the contract and put me out of work for 6 months. She said a smarter man would have kept his mouth shut. Pedersen shook his head. Sounds like she didn't understand what she had. Maybe. Or maybe she understood perfectly and decided she wanted something different. Marcus shrugged. Either way, it's over now. Her loss, Pedersen said firmly. The world needs more people willing to do the right thing, even when it costs them. Mitchell approached the table. Chief, you about ready? I promised my girlfriend I'd be home before midnight. Pedersen checked his watch. Yeah, we should go. He stood up and extended his hand to Marcus. Marcus Thompson, it's been an honor. Marcus stood and shook the offered hand. Likewise, Chief Pedersen. How did you know my rank? The way your men responded to you. That kind of immediate obedience comes from respect, not fear. And respect like that is earned, not demanded. Pedersen smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. You really are an interesting man, Marcus Thompson. I hope our paths cross again sometime. As the 2 SEALs headed for the door, Pedersen turned back one more time. Marcus, that thing you said about courage being doing what's right despite the fear, I'm going to remember that. Take care of yourself, Chief. And thank you for your service. After they left, Marcus finished his beer alone in the suddenly quiet bar. Jimmy cleaned glasses and prepared to close up, occasionally glancing at Marcus with newfound respect. That was something else, Jimmy said finally. I've never seen anything like that. Just a misunderstanding, Marcus replied modestly. Misunderstanding? Hell. You stood up to 6 Navy SEALs and made them back down without throwing a punch. That takes something special. Marcus didn't respond, but as he walked home through the quiet streets, he thought about his father and the lessons that had shaped his life. He thought about courage and character, about doing what's right even when it's hard, and he wondered what tomorrow would bring. He held his ground, and the 6 SEALs couldn't ignore who he really was. 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw any of the SEALs again. Life had returned to its normal routine of early mornings, hard work, and quiet evenings. The incident at Murphy's bar had become something of a legend among the regulars, with Jimmy retelling the story to anyone who would listen, though Marcus always tried to change the subject when he was present. On a Thursday evening, Marcus was leaving the construction site when he noticed a familiar figure waiting by his truck. Chief Pedersen leaned against the passenger door, dressed in civilian clothes, looking somehow smaller without his military bearing on full display. "Marcus," Pedersen said as he approached, "hope you don't mind me tracking you down. I asked Jimmy where you worked." "No problem," Marcus replied, though he was curious about what had brought the SEAL to his workplace. "Everything okay?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk. Maybe grab some coffee or something?" Marcus checked his watch. "There's a diner about 2 miles from here. Serves decent coffee and pie. You can follow me if you want." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a red vinyl booth at Rosie's Diner, steaming cups of coffee between them. The place was nearly empty except for a truck driver at the counter and an elderly couple sharing a piece of apple pie. "So what brings you by?" Marcus asked, adding cream to his coffee. Pedersen stared into his cup for a moment before answering. "I've been thinking about that night at Murphy's, about what you said and how you handled yourself. It wasn't a big deal." "That's where you're wrong," Pedersen said firmly. "It was a very big deal. You see, Marcus, something happened after we left the bar that night." Marcus waited for him to continue. "I went home and called my father. First time I'd talked to him in 6 months. Told him about the evening, about how we'd acted, about how you stood up to us." "What did he say?" Pedersen smiled sadly. "He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me if I remembered why I became a SEAL in the first place. Said it wasn't to intimidate civilians in bars, that was for sure." "Your father sounds like a thoughtful man." "He is. He also reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He said that the real test of a warrior isn't how tough he is when he's fighting enemies. It's how he acts when he has all the power and the other person has none." Marcus nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I failed that test, Marcus. We all did. But you passed a different kind of test. You had every reason to back down, every excuse to stay quiet, but you didn't. I just did what felt right. That's exactly my point." Pedersen leaned forward. "Do you know how rare that is? In my line of work, I meet a lot of people who talk about honor and courage and doing the right thing. But when push comes to shove, most of them fold. They find excuses, they rationalize, they compromise." Marcus was beginning to understand where this conversation was headed, but he wasn't sure he liked the direction. "Marcus, I've been authorized to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "The Navy has a program for exceptional individuals who didn't serve but demonstrate the kind of character and courage we value. It's called the Direct Commission Officer Program. With your leadership potential and moral courage, you could skip enlisted training and go directly to officer candidate school." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "You're offering me a commission? In the Navy?" "That's right. You'd start as an ensign, go through abbreviated training, and then be assigned to a unit that could use someone with your particular strengths." "Chief, I'm 32 years old. I've never been in the military. I run a small construction crew and live in a one-bedroom apartment. What makes you think I'd make a good officer?" Pedersen smiled. "Remember what I told you about SEAL training? About how the toughest-looking guys sometimes quit first while others who don't look like much keep going? Leadership isn't about being the biggest or strongest or loudest. It's about making good decisions under pressure and inspiring others to follow you. But I don't know anything about the military. That can be taught. What can't be taught is integrity, character, the willingness to stand up for what's right even when it costs you. You demonstrated all of those things in a 5-minute conversation with 6 drunk SEALs." Marcus shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I'm not officer material." "Why do you say that?" "Because officers are leaders. They're supposed to be special, exceptional. I'm just a regular guy who happened to have a big mouth that night. Pedersen studied him for a moment. Can I tell you about my first commanding officer? Marcus nodded. His name was Lieutenant Commander Harrison. He was about your age when I first served under him, and he was the best leader I've ever known. You want to know what made him special? What? He never tried to be special. He just tried to do the right thing, every single day, regardless of whether anyone was watching or whether it made his life easier or harder. Pedersen paused to take a sip of coffee. I remember one time we were in Afghanistan, and we captured a Taliban fighter. Young kid, maybe 18 years old, scared out of his mind. Some of the guys wanted to rough him up, get information out of him. Commander Harrison wouldn't allow it. What did he do? He sat with the kid for 3 hours talking to him in broken Arabic, sharing his water and MREs. No intimidation, no threats, just human decency. Eventually, the kid started talking, gave us intel that saved dozens of lives. The other guys must have been impressed. Some were. Others thought Harrison was soft, that he should have let them do things their way. But here's the thing, Marcus. Real leadership isn't about getting people to fear you or impress you. It's about getting them to trust you and follow you because they know you'll make the right decisions, even when they're hard. Marcus considered this. What happened to Commander Harrison? He retired as a full admiral, but more importantly, every man who served under him became a better person because of his example. They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus tried to imagine himself in a Navy uniform, leading troops, making decisions that affected people's lives. It seemed impossible. Chief, I'm flattered by the offer, I really am, but I have responsibilities here. My crew depends on me, and I've got contracts to fulfill. I understand that, and I respect it. But Marcus, how many people do you employ? 8 guys full-time, 4 part-time, during busy seasons. And you do good work for them? Treat them fairly? I try to. What would happen to those men if you died tomorrow? The question caught Marcus off guard. I guess they'd find other jobs. But the kind of leader you are, the example you set, the standards you maintain, those things would be lost, wouldn't they? Marcus began to see where Pedersen was going with this. In the military, Marcus, you could influence hundreds, maybe thousands of people. You could help shape the next generation of leaders. And the principles your father taught you, the character you've developed, that could have an impact far beyond what you could achieve in construction. But what if I'm not cut out for it? What if I fail? Pedersen leaned back in the booth. Can I tell you something? The night we met at Murphy's, I had my doubts about you. I thought maybe you were just lucky. Or maybe we were having an off night. So I did some checking. What kind of checking? I talked to people who know you, your crew, your former boss, some of the contractors you've worked with. Want to know what I found? Marcus waited nervously. Every single person told me the same thing. That Marcus Thompson is the most honest, reliable, principled man they've ever worked with. That you've never cut corners, never cheated a customer, never broken your word. One guy told me you once spent your own money to fix a mistake that wasn't even your fault because you felt responsible for the crew that made it. Marcus felt his face redden. That's just good business. No, Marcus, that's character. And it's exactly the kind of character the military needs in its leaders. I still don't know. You don't have to decide tonight. But I want you to think about something. Your father taught you to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, right? Right. Well, there are American soldiers deployed all over the world right now who need leaders they can trust. Leaders who will make the hard decisions, who will put their men's welfare above their own careers, who will do the right thing even when it's difficult. Pedersen pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. My phone number. Think about it, Marcus. Take as long as you need. But remember, you've already proven you have what it takes to lead. You just need to decide whether you want to use that gift in service to your country. Marcus picked up the card and studied it. How long would I have to serve? Minimum commitment is 8 years. But honestly, men like you usually make it a career. And my crew? They'd be fine. Good workers always find good bosses. But more importantly, the example you set for them, the way you've shown them how to work with integrity and pride, that'll stay with them forever. As they prepared to leave the diner, Pedersen had one more thing to say. Marcus, that night at Murphy's, you did something that most people never get the chance to do. You showed a group of warriors what real courage looks like. Now I'm asking you to consider taking that courage and using it to make a difference on a much larger scale. Marcus drove home in silence, turning Pedersen's words over in his mind. He thought about his father, about the lessons he had learned, about the kind of man he wanted to be. He thought about the 12 men who depended on him for their livelihoods, and he thought about the soldiers overseas who might need the kind of leadership he could provide. That night, he called his mother and told her about the conversation. She listened quietly, asking questions but not offering advice. Finally, she said, "Your father always believed that when life gives you an opportunity to make a real difference, you should take it seriously. But I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. Honey, nobody's ever ready for the big decisions. But your father also used to say that character isn't built in the big moments. It's revealed in them." Marcus spent the next week thinking about Pedersen's offer. He talked to his crew foreman about what would happen if he left. He researched the Direct Commission Officer program and read about other men who had taken similar paths. He visited his father's grave and had a long, one-sided conversation about duty, service, and the unexpected directions life could take. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after his conversation with Pedersen, Marcus made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the business card. Pedersen. "Chief, it's Marcus Thompson." "Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. What did you decide?" Marcus took a deep breath. "When do I start?"